Good evening. It is Sunday, August 7th. Welcome to the Variable Play Network. My name is Javi. This is Sunday Night Magic, where we talk about everything magic. So, tonight is going to be a interesting episode. I guess it's something I would consider towards the fundamentals or basics of magic. So, this is something that's been asked by several viewers of the show, and I really appreciate the feedback. And I am, doing my best to deliver this content that you guys feel is very important. So tonight we're going to be talking about something that is, not let's not go to just the very beginning of magic, because usually when you're getting into the hobby, the rules and explanations of this is, something that you can learn through going to your local game stores. You can learn through other players, or pretty much there is the comprehensive rule book of magic. I don't recommend reading that because it's over 200 pages. So learning from another player, even from Magic Arena, you can learn how to play Magic pretty quick. Now, there are fundamentals and rules or principles that Magic the Gathering follows, let's say with card design or theming, like what do the colors of Magic represent? And that all starts adding up into how you would create your own deck, or how Magic the Gathering or Wizards of the Coast designs decks. So today I wanted to kind of talk about, once you take that step further into understanding Magic the Gathering and you want to start playing, I'm really speaking towards like my personal experience playing different formats of Magic, and now I'm really primarily focused on Commander or EDH. Today I wanted to talk about the deck archetypes of Magic the Gathering. So when I say that, when I say deck archetype, that these are sort of like I would say a common theme or a way of building particular decks, like their purpose, their focus on what they're trying to achieve, or how they help you win, or pretty much at the same time, like when you play against them, it gives you an idea also of like what their main objective is. So let me go ahead and just load up my screen here. I did have a presentation loaded up. Unfortunately, I'm still kind of learning this, and I did lose a lot of the formatting, especially the font format. So forgive me for that. And let me go ahead and take away the banner and our logo here for a moment. And I will do my best to monitor comments for anyone that would like to contribute to today's conversation. And I also have my trusty resource for card examples ready to go, which is Scryfall. If you are doing research on Magic the Gathering, definitely look into EDH Rec, which is a great resource specifically for EDH and Commander builds. And then also, Magic the Gathering has its own search engine, the Gatherer, but I prefer using Scryfall mainly because I do tend to pick up the art or the card images that I use for personal deck building when I try to test out builds. So, we might jump into that later when trying to go through some examples. But first and foremost, the very first thing that I wanted to go over here is that Magic the Gathering has arguably either three or four basic deck archetypes. These are, like, to start off, you have the aggro. When we say aggro, these are very highly aggressive decks that their main purpose is to put out threat after threat that is slowly eating away at your opponent, dealing damage to them. So a typical game of Magic the Gathering, you have 20 life, but when we're going towards Commander, you have 40 life and it's multiplayer. So it has different ways of doing that, that pretty much you're just attacking players. That is what aggro is built on. That you are applying pressure to an opponent until they are dead. Control, on the other hand, is a way of playing Magic that is sort of taking a back seat and stopping other players from fulfilling their plan. So, hence the control part. This has a lot of removal, this has a lot of counter magic. The idea here is that you're going to put yourself in a state of advantage over your opponents, where they cannot do anything anymore, and more or less it's you take control of the game. It's a much slower paced way of playing. It's so much more, um, I would say, not complex, but it does require really a lot of foresight and planning into the next turns. So this is, I guess, a little bit more difficult than aggro, because aggro is just smash face really. And then the third one is combo. Combo, which is my preferred playstyle, is really finding cards that work together. The best, the ideal kind of combo would be, of course, a two-card combo. Two cards that work together and build an infinite loop that would just outright take out your opponent. So the entire deck is built around achieving that as quick as possible. So aggro decks that are relatively fast and deal a lot of damage can take out control players. Control builds or control decks have a lot of removal and a lot of control, but they can't go one is to one against an aggro deck. So aggro beats control. It's just there's too much threats to deal with that a control deck will fold. Now, a control deck can deal with combo by not allowing them to do what they intended to do in the first place. The whole idea of a combo deck is that, oh, I got these two cards that when they work together, it's infinite. Well, a control deck can just flat out deny you that and not even let you play at all. So, control beats combo. Now, combo can beat aggro mainly because aggro decks are trying to deal damage, and typically a combo deck doesn't even necessarily care about their life. Like I said earlier, they're trying to get through that combination as soon as possible. That they can technically outrun an aggro deck because aggro decks typically do not have answers for pieces of a combo. So that's the way that these three particular archetypes work. Now, there don't be limited to this. There are aggro control, there are control and combo that once you have the board state, you just flat out do your combo and win. And there's even aggro decks that have a combo built into it should everything just fold and go to crap, that this is plan B for them. So there are hybrids of this, and one of the major ones that always comes up in conversation is mid-range. I don't really consider mid-range to be in any particular position against aggro beating mid-range, mid-range beating control. No, I consider the way that I interpret mid-range, and I'm open, of course, to having a conversation about this for anyone who has their thoughts. That I consider it a combination of the different principles of the three basic archetypes. So mid-range does have aggro. It does have creatures that smash face, but it also does have either control pieces to slow down the game until that midpoint where then they start leading, or they also could technically have like a combo built into it that can go off at any time once their control is established. Um, Mid range really is the idea here is that aggro overcommits, control waits for the right moment, and combo is just trying to go as fast as possible. So mid range would maybe be the slowest among all of them, hence the name of like mid range. It's supposed to be mid game. So it's somewhere before control because there are control decks that can last until the very end. Like they'll maximize like a full hour and a half or more just to make you draw out your last card, and it's torture. So combo's trying to get it over with as soon as possible. So is aggro. So somewhere in the middle of all of that is mid range. I'll give you a couple of ideas later on, and primarily what we're going to do now is talk about the basic builds. Taking these fundamental archetypes, I'm going to go through each one of them and even have a little bit of a special mention in the end for the ones that I'm not able to categorize. So, you know, while you're watching this, if you do have any questions, if something doesn't necessarily make sense to you, please comment to this video. If you're not currently on the live stream, I will, try to check the comments from time to time and see if I can respond and answer any questions. But of course, I would prefer that you be on the live stream. So, join us in our future episodes when we go over things like this. I am thinking of doing a little deeper dive into some of the other aspects of like Magic's fundamentals, but I thought this would be a good place to start. So let's go ahead and jump into aggro. Okay, as I described earlier, the whole point of aggro is to put threat after threat onto the board while reducing your opponent's life totals down to zero. The very first example of this are called rush decks. There are red rush, black rush. It doesn't necessarily matter what color of magic. The idea here is that you're putting low casting cost creatures that come down really early and just start hitting face. Um, Red, white, and green are actually primarily really good examples of this, but I wouldn't put it past, of course, blue and black. They do also have this capability. They're always putting in new cards into Magic that help this. So primarily, you can also consider this as like the army deck that it's all really creature based. The next version of this that you can expect or might encounter are called Stompy decks. When they say Stompy, they're talking about big creatures. They don't necessarily come out as early as possible, but so it might be arguable that a Stompy deck is more mid-range, but with the amount of acceleration that is available to Magic players now, you can put down pretty big threats pretty fast in Magic now. Like there are four to cast threats that can get down into the battlefield by turn two in ideal conditions. So Stompy is definitely an example of an aggro deck. It is plain aggression, just beat your opponent down. Third one is tribal. So there are different tribes or different creature types in Magic the Gathering, and a lot of them really serve purposes of just smashing face. Like goblins, for example, are small little creatures that just keep attacking and have synergies with them that involve them usually dying or sacrificing themselves to each other, and even when they die they also cause damage to happen. So goblins are like really suicidal in a way, but to the point that it's also to the detriment of your opponent. There are other tribal builds like zombies that keep coming back and keep amassing armies. Merfolk, knights. Okay, knights are and even humans. Well, humans are arguable because they're all five colors and it's so flexible. You can build every kind of version of human that you want. Um, so pretty much tribal is just sticking towards like one specific creature type, which gives you a consistent army that synergizes with each other. Infect is a very specific ability in Magic the Gathering. So normally in a game of Magic, you have 20 life. In Commander, you have 40 life. And when that is reduced to zero, you're dead. Infect changes that rule in that you deal damage to your opponent in the form of poison counters. If they have 10 poison counters, they lose. They're dead. So it cuts the 20 in half, and it even makes it's a fourth of what the 40 life in EDH is. So Infect is a very highly aggressive deck that is aiming to get you to 10 poison counters as quick as possible. Like they really push that as soon as they can. And they even have supporting abilities that do not require attacking, like proliferate, and even other like direct damage spells that involve the creature dealing damage. So the infect still takes effect basically. Next is tokens. Similar to the Russian army build, instead of committing too many cards, you are using cards that make tokens. What do you do with the tokens? You attack. So plain and simple, it's basically amassing an army just really to take out your opponents. Voltron is a little trickier. Voltron is a sort of an archetype that is built around either enchantments, auras, or equipment, artifacts that are attached to creatures. Basically, you have like one main creature that you will be committing all of your artifacts and auras to make it something huge and nearly indestructible to just kill your opponent. So there are pros and cons to that because you are kind of committed to this one creature that when it's removed, it's hard to recover. But when you do get when you get the build the way that you want, it's nearly unstoppable. The final one here is called the Spell Slinger deck. I put an asterisk here similar to Tribal because this isn't the only category where it can fall under. Spell Slingers are decks that want to cast spells. Typically, in a aggro spell slinger deck, there are cards that you are playing that benefit from you playing spells. Red and blue have, even white have great examples of this. That is an ability called Prowess. Creatures with prowess get bigger for every spell you cast. So, spell slinger decks put these creatures down and start throwing damage around the table to remove blockers, making those creatures with prowess like bigger and bigger, and then can wither away your opponent to zero life. So spell slingers are they also kind of lean towards control or maybe a little bit more mid-range. So it applies in different areas, but I included it here because there are aggressive decks that are also dealing damage through combat and throwing damage to their opponent's face. So these are the typical aggro deck types that you will encounter. Um, it depends on the format that you're playing. Like, I will tell you that rush decks are not that common. Let's say in a commander deck, in a commander pod, because you have three opponents. If you're really overcommitting like your little one ones to attacking an opponent, you have two others to worry about. There's too many opponents, so usually aggro decks kind of struggle in a multiplayer format. But if it's really quick, like Infect, or has just so much recurrence that it just keeps producing more and more like a token deck, you can definitely really work aggro into a great strategy in Commander. So let me go ahead and just pull up. Let's pull up. Let's see, to give you some ideas here. Well, actually, yeah, for Volt, let's go with Infect. All right. So this is Scryfall, like I mentioned earlier. So to give you an idea, we're going to be looking for. Oh, I misspelled that. Okay, so let's go with Blighted to give you an idea. So here we go, Blighted Agent. So this is a creature that has Infect and happens to just be unblockable. This creature deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters and to players in the form of poison counters. So if you have 10 poison counters, you are dead. And you cannot stop this because it is unblockable. You're going to have to kill the creature through other means than combat. So this is an example of how Infect gets through and kills an opponent. You just have to get this power to 10 basically, or even just take maybe one or two swings at an opponent and pump this thing up and you can take them out. So that is the purpose of it. Now for a different build that we mentioned earlier, let me go ahead and pull up, let's see. So Stampy? No, I think Stampy makes sense on its own. Everyone gets that. Let's see. We can do Infect, Token. Oh, Voltron. Okay, yeah, I can give you an example of Voltron. That will help. All right. So one example here is SRAM. So SRAM Senior Edificer. So he is a 2 to cast 2/2 dwarf. Whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. So you don't even necessarily have to put the auras or equipment on SRAM himself, but you do get the benefit of drawing a card. So you typically want to protect him or make him big so that he won't die in combat. So this is an example of a Voltron build. Now, what auras equipments will you be adding in? It really depends also on the colors that you choose. So those are some examples of um, Voltron and Infect. For a Spell Slinger deck, let me go ahead and jump over again and let me try looking for. Hmm. I'm trying to think of a build that we could probably go with here. Let's go to the advanced settings. All right. So the card has prowess. Let's see what we get with the search options. Here we go. Lots of options with prowess. Perfect. So very first one, let's go with this Abbot of Carol Keep, a 2 to cast 2/1 human monk. Whenever you cast a non creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. When Abbot enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library and then you may play that card. So it actually even gives you access to a card that could make it bigger. Or it might be a land that you're looking for. So the idea here is that you're casting spells to make creatures with prowess bigger. So you can more or less just beat your opponent down. So there's other examples that are not specific just to that ability. So let me go ahead here and show you Calamax, the Stormsire. Calamax is a 4 to cast 4/4. And whenever you cast your first instant spell each turn, if Calamax is tapped, copy that spell. So pretty much you want them to be tapped. And how would you do that? Probably by attacking. So when you attack and you cast an instant or spell sling, you pretty much get two copies of it. And whenever you copy an instant, you get a +1/+1 counter and Calamax. So you're incentivized for casting spells or instants while Calamax is tapped. So this is another example of like a spell slinger build because it is more or less built around to be aggro. You're trying to beat your opponent down, and you're also casting spells at the same time. So let's move on to the next archetype. We are now looking at control. Control is a way again of playing magic in that um, you're pretty much hindering or stopping your opponents from doing what they want to do. That you are literally controlling the board state of your game until you're in a situation wherein you're at the advantage and then you can start moving in for the kill. Okay. There's different ways on how that happens, but basically this is a matter of biding your time until conditions are right. The very first archetype or sample or type of deck that you might encounter here is something called Super Friends. Super Friends is just a weird, dumb term that kind of came out in the last few years when the Oath of the Gatewatch came out. That Magic tried to make their own little Avenger team, and it's pretty cheesy. And I'm not really particular fan of the story itself, but Super Friends is a build, and if you look it up on Google, that there are so many different kinds, and essentially what this is a deck built around planeswalkers. There's barely any creatures, basically. It's really just planeswalkers that act as like second, third, or fourth players. They have additional abilities that help you out, and the whole purpose of this is that they they complement each other and they lead up to controlling the game. Some planeswalkers have removal, some planeswalkers help you bring in more lands, untap permanents, and so you're using all of them to synergize with one another until your opponents can't do anything about it. It's like a snowball, it's just getting bigger and bigger. All right. So essentially, that is what Super Friends is. There are different ways of playing it. I've seen black green. I've also seen four color black, green, blue, white, which is the Atraxa build. Um, there is even monocolor, but I've made my own black and blue version that it was just a lot of control cards and planeswalkers. Since planeswalkers do not die to like mass removal spells, They stay in the game while then no more creatures are left to kill them. Stacks, which is one of the playstyles that I do particularly enjoy, or it's pretty much also known as the prison build or taxes. So there are different ways that you can make stacks, but basically what this does is that it you are controlling the game by applying rules and um, ways to hinder people from actually playing Magic. You're going to take away combat steps. You're going to take away untapping. People can't draw more than a card, or that there's a cost to doing everything. Casting a spell costs more, or will require you to sacrifice things. So you're literally stacking up these conditions to the point that your opponents can no longer play Magic. But this usually involves cards that break parity, in that you're not restricted by these rules that you're putting into the game. Like, take for an example, let me go ahead and look for something here that would be an example of a pretty good stacks card. Here we go. Here, let's go with the Dranet Magistrate. Oh, did I? Oh, I misspelled it. Sorry, it missed an N. All right, so this is the Dranet Magistrate. It is two to cast. It is a wizard, and it says that your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. So it specifically says your opponents, you're not affected, which means that this breaks parity in a way that if you make conditions in that, let's say, all spells are no longer played from people's hands, then you're the only one who gets to play Magic. So take this into consideration. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. It has to be from their hands. And so you introduce another card like the Uba Mask. If a player would draw a card instead, that player removes that card from the game face up. So it is not in the game, it is removed face up. Each player may play cards he or she removed from the game with Uba Mask this turn. But wait, it's not in your hand. So the Dranet Magistrate pretty much held down everything. So here, let me show you the cards really quick so you get an idea. All right, so let me add this in. This is Dranet Magistrate that I was talking about. So Dranet Magistrate, again, is a creature to the cast. Your opponents cannot cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Has to be their hands. And the next one is called Uba Mask. So there, if a player would draw a card, they remove it from the game face up instead. And they're allowed to play that. But Dranet says they can't. So opponents are not allowed to play any more cards that they're drawing, but you are. So that is an example of breaking parity. So that is where stacks comes in and controls the game, in that your opponents can no longer play Magic and you can. You build an advantage and you win. The next one is called Pillow Fort. So this is usually like a turtle build. Of these are for players that are really just making sure that nothing can happen to them. They cannot get hurt. People cannot attack them. People cannot target them. So let me go ahead and give you some examples here. So very first one that comes to mind is one of the probably one of the most used versions of all of this, which is called Ghostly Prison. So Ghostly Prison reads as follows. Creatures can't attack you unless their controllers pay 2 colorless for each creature they control that's attacking. So this is a tax effect that if your opponent wants to attack you, they have to pay. All right. So that's a way of kind of building this pillow fort. Now, let's say you copy this enchantment. Now it costs 4 colorless for someone to attack you. Sorry, not someone, per creature. And then you can copy it again and make it just really almost impossible to attack you. So there are other versions of this, but basically you're protecting yourself by preventing your opponents from doing anything to you. One other example that I might share here is called Ivory Mask. You can't be the target of spells or abilities. So this flat out removes your opponent's abilities to do anything to you. Trick is you also can't target yourself if you intend to do that. So this is another Pillow Fort card also to give you an idea of just how you can slowly protect yourself. Um, Let me see. One more. I think it's called Revenge of Ravens. There you go. Yep. So Revenge of Ravens is a black example now. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller loses a life and you gain a life. So it taxes and hurts your opponents to attack you. So it's building the situation wherein they do not want to do that, and then you start compounding it over and over again to the point that it's just not even worth going for you. And that's pretty much what a pillow fort is. Next is mill. When Magic the Gathering terminology, mill means taking cards from the top of your library and putting it into your graveyard. Why would you do that? If you are unable to draw a card, you lose the game. So, in a normal game of Magic, you have 60 cards. You're drawing your first seven, so you're really playing with 53 cards on a deck. And if you can get that down to zero and your opponent cannot draw a card, they lose. So that's where mill comes in. But there are also approaches here where you are taking advantage of milling yourself. Why would you want to do that? There are alternative wins in Magic in that if you can change that rule that if you're unable to draw a card, you actually win the game. There are also ways to play things from your graveyard, such as a reanimator deck. How do you get your big creatures into your graveyard without playing them? If you mill yourself, they become available in the graveyard. There are abilities like Threshold, Flashback, Delve, Dredge. Magic has a lot of abilities that care about the graveyard, and if you're trying to fill it up, self milling is an option. Now, if you're trying to prevent your opponent, like, oh, I don't want you to play creatures, I will mill them all, which means that you're not drawing creatures anymore. So, this is a way of controlling the game in that you're denying your opponent's cards. Next one is called Blink. Blink is kind of tricky to explain, but Magic the Gathering cards typically have effects when they come into the game. When X comes into the battlefield, something happens. And there are abilities or blink spells that will remove a card from the game and bring it back in, essentially letting you get that blink effect one more time. So, to give you an example here, let me go really quick here. Let's try Merchant of Secrets. This is a very quick example that I think will make sense. So, Merchant of Secrets, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. That's pretty simple, right? So, next thing that you probably want to do now is to kind of get it out of the way. So, let's try Ephemerate. Exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So you bring in Merchant of Secret, you draw a card. When you ephemerate it, it leaves the game, and when it comes back under your control, you draw a card again. This even has rebound, which means it happens one more time. So blink effects are either used to your advantage, such as this example, or let me try. I wonder if I'm spelling that correctly. Okay, let's see if I got that right. Rishadan Cutpurse. Did I spell this correctly? Yes, I did. Okay, Rishadan Cutpurse is a 3 to cast 1/1 pirate. There, it's already been errated to a human pirate. When it comes into play, each opponent sacrifices a permanent unless he or she pays one. As you blink this and keep bringing it back into the game, You keep taxing your opponents until they are unable to pay and have to start sacrificing permanents. So, blink decks are really built all around cards that do something when they come into the game and repeating that over and over again. There are, like in Commander, there are specific legendary creatures that actually get to do that every turn per attack, like the Brago build. Brago is a an amazing blink commander, basically. Next is land destruction. This is probably one of the most uh, hate-inducing um, archetypes of Magic, which is basically destroy your opponent's lands so that they can no longer play Magic. This usually involves destroying everything in the game, and including lands, and then you being at an advantage. Hence, this is control. Let's just say that. Um, Let me pull up an example to show you all so that you get an idea. So let's try wildfire. So let's here, the actual wildfire card. So cost 6, each player sacrifices 4 lands. Wildfire deals 4 damage to each creature. Now let's say that you don't have any creatures, but your opponents do. Let's say that your opponents have 4 lands while you have 6. When you cast this, suddenly you're the only one with 2 lands left and there's no more creatures. You are now at an advantage. So land destruction typically puts opponents in a situation wherein they're at an immediate disadvantage and you roll in for that win. All right. So land destruction is pretty hated in Magic, mainly because it it feels bad, gets people salty. Why? Because now they can't play Magic anymore. So they're just there, just watching you beat them down. So it is part of control. So that's why I included it here. My opinions as to you know how, like, I guess how right, or how, if you should play land destruction. I don't know. I don't play land destruction, but I have added, or I've actually dabbled in it before, and yeah, I've just seen how it makes people feel bad. So next is theft and exchange. So these are usually builds that either steal creatures from your opponent and use them against them, or also exchange, let's say, creature for creature, but usually at a really bad exchange rate. So, or you give them something that is actually really bad for them. So there are a lot of examples of that, but typically, I think that fundamentally people understand what this is, that you're just stealing from your opponent to use it against them. One very quick example that comes to mind, and this is something that most people are familiar with, is called bribery. So bribery is a 5 to cast spell. Search target opponent's library for a creature card and put that card into the battlefield under your control. Imagine if you come across a creature that costs more than 5. You still get it for free. So let's go with Blightsteel. So there is the Blightsteel Colossus, which costs 12. It's impossible to cast at 5. But there, it's a 11/11 Trample, Infect, Indestructible. If your opponent has one, you can cast Bribery and steal it from them. So the entire theft and exchange build is really revolving around just taking what your opponents consider to be useful and using it against them. Next is discard. Discard builds are really built around black, but there are some blue, and I think there's a little bit of red that can be added into this. But typically, this is another way of controlling the game by just making your opponents not have any cards in hand. So, kill all the creatures, get rid of all the cards in your opponent's hand. Now, what are they going to do? Nothing. Then you start killing them. It takes a while to get to that point, but it is possible. In a commander or multiplayer game, there are ways to do this, but it usually draws a lot of hate and attention. So It's a lot harder to pull this off in a multiplayer game. But in one-on-one, the moment your opponent has no cards in hand, that's it. You can begin your plan. Last one is called permission. Basically, this is exactly what control originally started as. This is counter spells and creature destruction or removal. Permission decks are built around your opponent, like, oh, I'm going to cast this. Do you counter? Or oh, I'm going to put this into play. Do you have any response? Basically, they know that you are built to stop them and prevent them from playing. So they almost literally ask for permission to play Magic. Hence the permission title. Or that in the other way of it is that your opponent plays something and like, oh, I'll allow it. So that's why it has that nickname of permission, that you literally lord over your opponent's ability to cast spells. um, there's way too many examples here, but I guess the easiest way here is that counter magic, anything that counters a spell, is probably in a permission deck. So let's go to the third one here. Combo. Right. This one's gonna be pretty quick and easy, I suppose. There are different kinds of builds for combos. These are the ones that immediately come to mind for me. Like when I was making this list, it seemed pretty simple. Very first one is Alpha Strike. Alpha Strike is just a way of having a single combat that takes out everyone at once. Let me go ahead and share again here. So one thing that comes to mind is called a Crater Hoof. So there is a card here called the Crater Hoof Behemoth. It is 8 to cast. There are ways to cheat it in, which we're going to talk about later. And when it comes into the battlefield, creatures you control get trample and plus X+X. So it's including itself, where X is the number of creatures you control. If you have 20 creatures, each one of them gets plus 20/20. So it's pretty quick and easy that your opponents are just going to flat out die because they also get plus X and trample, which means that the damage goes through. So you're building up to just one big attack and taking everyone out in one swing. That is what an Alpha Strike is. Next is Storm. Storm is one of the most busted mechanics in Magic, but there are variations to this. Storm is basically you playing a progressive amount of spells in a single turn. Storm counts the number of spells you've played in a single turn. So you're slowly building that up to the point that when you cast anything that has the ability of Storm, you get that many copies. So back to the sample. Let's go ahead and just use Grape Shot. This one's pretty simple. Oh, I think it should have been 2 words or should have been 1 word. Let's try it. There you go. Grape Shot. So Grape Shot is 2 to cast, deal 1 damage to any target. Storm. If you played 40 spells and cast Grape Shot, you get 41 copies of this, and it's just 1 damage. So that's an extreme example, but the idea here is that you're trying to play as many spells as you can. And in a combo deck, that usually involves you building a recurring loop of spells. So let me give you an example here. Um, let's say you have, let's use Retract. There you go. So let's say you have an 3 or 4 artifacts that costs maybe 1 or less. You play an artifact, you play an artifact, you play an artifact, and so on and so forth. Like you build, let's say, like 2 or 3, spell count 4. You cast Retract and you return them all to your hand. Return all artifacts you control to their owner's hand. And let's say you cast them all again. You have essentially doubled the number of spells that you played that turn, and it's only cost you 1 blue. So now imagine if all of those artifacts cost 0 to cast, that it cost you nothing. And then when you play something like Grape Shot, you get all of the added benefit. So there are a lot of ways to really build Storm. Um, the easiest one is there are cards now that are really zero to cast and that can be recurring spells over and over again that just build a spell count. Um, one card I would probably have to show here is the Aetherflux Reservoir. So if we go to Aetherflux Reservoir, this for the cast. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you cast this turn. So your first spell gains you 1 life, your second spell gains you two, three, four, so on and so forth. If you are casting, let's say, up to your 10th spell, you've gained seven, eight, nine. If you start doing the math to that, you've actually already gained 24 life out of just seven, eight, and nine. And then when you get to your 10th spell, you've gained about 34 life. And you only have to pay 50 life here, and Aether Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. So, if you are able to keep a consistent amount of spells, you're going to gain up to 50 life and probably be able to shoot someone in a single shot. If you're able to do it, let's say in an infinite loop, which is something that we're going to talk about a little later, pretty much you win. So that is Storm. It's just this progressive build up of spells. There are alternate names to it, like Cheerios, which is all zero to cast, hence the name Cheerios. There's Bomberman, which is just a zero to cast spell and using something called a spell bomb in a endless loop. It is like a storm effect, but it just doesn't have the storm ability. The third combo is called the cheat in, which means that you are cheating in something huge. So there are like animators. So you bring a creature from the grave back for super cheap. So let's go over some samples here. So the very first one is, of course, reanimate. For 1 black, put target creature card from your graveyard into the battlefield and you lose life equal to its value. Sometimes the life just doesn't matter, but you get like the biggest thing that you have in your graveyard for 1. And your opponents just have to deal with that problem. Next is show and tell. Each player may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land from their hand onto the battlefield. Sure, your opponents get to put stuff in, but what if you have something as massive as that 12 to cast Lightsteel Colossus we were looking at earlier? Like, you can gain a massive advantage here. Now, what if your opponents have no hand because you have made them discard it, or that you've made it like excessively expensive for them to cast something? This is suddenly just a one-sided card. So you are basically cheating something into the game that you normally wouldn't be able to do so. Another one is called Sneak Attack. Sneak Attack. You may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. That creature gains haste, and then it gets sacrificed at your end step. But basically, you get to put in any creature you want for a single red mana. That's super busted. Other ones that come into mind is, so we're pretty much doing all colors here. Primal, oh no, not Primal Order. Oh, sorry. Natural Order. My mistake. For the cast, as an additional cost for Natural Order, sacrifice a green creature. Search your library for a green creature card and put it onto the battlefield. This is for the cast. Remember Crater Hoof earlier being 8 to cast? Not anymore. And it just can cost you even like a simple little token or actually an elf that was used to cast this spell. So there are ways of really cheating in something for the kill, and that is that particular build. So, you know, you cheat in creatures to go into an alpha strike to gain an advantage, to put your opponent in a very tight situation, and just end up building an infinite loop. So that is the fourth type here. There are infinite turns with extra spells, extra turn spells that you can repeat, infinite combat, infinite damage, infinite life loss, infinite mill and draw. So why would you do that? Why would you mill out your opponents, or why would you want to draw infinitely? That leads to the last build, or the last combo type, which is called the alternate win. You can win in certain conditions for not being able to draw a card anymore, or you can also win alternatively for having multiple copies of the same kind of creature. So let me go ahead and look for it here. So it's oh no, that is so spelled wrong. Sorry. It is a biomancer. Here we go. Master Biomancer. Each other creature you control enters the battlefield with the number of +1/+1 counters equal to Master Biomancer's power. Oh no, this isn't it. No, no. I'm trying to think of like what the name of that card was. It's in the same set, I think. My mistake. I thought that that was the card I was looking for. But here, Simic Ascendancy instead. Pretty much the same build here. It's an enchantment that puts +1/+1 counters on creatures. Whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Simic Ascendancy has 20 or more growth counters, you win the game. Doesn't care about life total, doesn't care if you can't draw a card or anything like that. It just flat out wins. So this is what you would consider an alternate win. For not being able to draw a card, so we have the Laboratory Maniac. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game. So basically, it reverses the rule of not being able to draw a card. And last one is Felidar Sovereign. There are different versions of these. That so Veladar Sovereign is a 6 to cast 4/6 Vigilance Lifelink. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 or more life, you win the game. Guess how many life you start the game with in a game of Commander? 40. You just have to stay alive for one round and at 40 life, and you win the game with this. So this is an alternate win. That is pretty much the idea here, is to just break out of the usual norms of Magic standard win conditions. Hey, thank you for joining, Mark. So yeah, we're about an hour into talking about different deck archetypes. So I hope that you find some of this information helpful for you. So pretty much there, we've gone through now pretty all of the combo deck types that I have typically seen or made myself. Um, I'm sure that there might be one or two examples that are not included here in the stuff that I've gone through. So, any comments and feedback again are much appreciated. So, we've gone through aggro, we've gone through control, and we've gone through combo. Now, mid range was something that I mentioned also earlier, and these are builds that combine different aspects of those three archetypes. Battle Cruiser is definitely a late game build. This is you amassing an army of really, really big creatures, typically flyers or something that are unblockable, that or indestructible, that they are just waiting for that opportunity just to like take out a player. Yes, Felidar sounds it is a cheat. It's an alternate win, and there are different versions of it, man. It is actually a creature version of a card that was made much earlier in Magic's history, but required 50 life for some reason. So actually, here just for your benefit, it is called Test of Endurance. So Test of Endurance is a 4 to cast enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 50 or more life, you win the game. So if you are in white life link or even a green white life link deck that you build around like a prison that people can't attack you or you can't lose life, you can just flat out win on your upkeep. So White typically has that approach of just if they've gained a certain amount of life, they win the game. There are other examples. Green has Helix, Pinnacle. There's so much more, but alternate win conditions exist and are really like um, just a way of flat out. It's a combo because you're kind of building a loop that meets the requirement, and suddenly you just flat out win. It's a surprise out of nowhere. So going back to mid range, battle cruiser, just building up a massive army of usually progressively larger and larger creatures and just going for one big strike. I recently just played against an angel tribal deck, which pretty much played like a battle cruiser because it got to the point that every angel had +7/+7 as a static effect on a single attack, could probably take out multiple players, which is what happened in our case. So that's battle cruiser. This is usually for players who are, they're not in a rush. They want to see what everyone's decks do or what creatures they have in it. So they allow the game to extend to this point that everyone's armies are facing each other, and then you just go for that one swing. Aristocrats is a build that has very different versions, but it has primarily started with black, white, and red. These are combining taxing effects. It started at black and white, so black and white have a lot of examples of this. And the reason why it's called aristocrats is mainly because the creatures that initially started this whole theme were like either like nobles or like not necessarily fighters. So one that comes to mind is called the Blood Artist. So a Blood Artist is a 2 to cast 0/1, so it is not an aggressive creature at all. It is a vampire. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So you have, again, like a perfect example of what this encompasses, that the whole deck is like when stuff dies, there are effects to it. Um, let's pull up Judith. Let's see if she comes up. There you go. Judith, the Scourge Diva. Other creatures you control have +1/+0. Whenever a non token creature you control dies, Judith, the Scourge Diva, deals 1 damage to any target. So instead of life loss, this can actually kill other creatures. So, but it is dependent on any of your own non tokens dying. So aristocrat decks are built around creatures coming in and dying. So there are enter the battlefield and leaving the battlefield like death triggers. And you build this weird synergy of them going back and forth. You can ramp that up into an infinite loop. And these are typically small creatures, so you can go aggro if you want. But usually, like for the example I showed you with Blood Artist, they usually have very, very small power and toughness that they actually want to die, or that you get other benefits instead. That maybe you'll use it to draw cards, or you'll sacrifice creatures for mana, or put your opponents in a situation when you sacrifice, they also have to sacrifice. So it even leans towards control because you can shoot creatures or force them into situations. So that's aristocrats. Tribal is included here again with that asterisk because there are mid range tribal. There are very fast goblins. There are very like like demons are all like 6, 7 the cast. You're never really gonna get that out. But like dragons, like a dragon deck is very mid range because the average casting cost of a dragon is around 6. So that's not going to happen in the first few turns. You could probably like maybe cheat in one dragon, but the next few are going to take a while. So tribal decks can fit into the mid range because sometimes also it takes a while for some of them to build up. Like elf decks can have this really, really steady progression into becoming like an avalanche that you are not able to stop. But let's say something like wizard tribal, Usually, some of the most powerful wizards cost so much that the cheaper ones just buy you time, hence it be fitting into that whole mid-range meta. Next one is called the pod or toolbox. This takes this is pretty much a deck built around having utility creatures that are answers to other things. They break artifacts, they they let you draw cards, or they break enchantments, or that they have creature removal built into them. And ideally, this all started from a card called the Birthing Pod. So you're going to play a creature to start the game, and then you can sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrificed creature's power. So you're getting a bigger version, something bigger, something bigger. So, and you can pretty much sacrifice the creature that you're not using anymore or is too small to actually put up a fight, and then you can go get something that you need. There are other versions of this that have already come out, and some like let's go with Prime Speaker. All right, so there is a creature version of that, which is Prime Speaker Vanifar. So sacrifice another creature, search your library. It's pretty much the exact same ability, but it is on a creature. Um, you also have, I think it's called a Pyre. It's supposed to be an artifact. Here you go, Pyre of Heroes. Sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature card of the same type and one again. So it's pretty much an artifact version that has a little bit more restrictions. So, and this doesn't have any color attached to it. So there are those advantages as well. Um, Alternate versions that do something else. Oswald Fiddlebender. Pay 1 white, sacrifice an artifact. Search your library for an artifact with mana value 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's value, put it into the game. So these are the pod effects. The idea here is that it's all built out of Birthing Pod. You sacrifice something, you get something better. It starts building up and building up. And so that this happens really in the middle of the game, and what you're getting are usually answers to what the board state is, hence the toolbox portion of this. Um, Next one's called Group Hug. This one's a little hard to explain, but basically, you are helping everyone else in the table by giving them benefits, but you're getting maybe twice the benefit. So, what does that mean? Let me go ahead and again show you some examples here. Let's go ahead and jump into Feldegriff. I hope I am spelling that correct because, oh my god, this thing has such a hard name. There you go. So, this is the original Feldegriff. It is a 3 color for the cast 4/4. You can give Feldegriff Trample, but target opponent gets a 1/1 Hippo token. Feldegriff gains Flying, but an opponent gains 2 life. Feldegriff can be returned to your hand, but you're going to let your opponent draw a card. So the trick here is that it doesn't have to be the opponent you're attacking that you're going to give it Trample or Flying to. And you can combine this with other cards that actually help. So let's say that you want to return Feldegriff to your hand and let your opponent draw a card. Let's go ahead and say that you probably have um, what's the name of that Sphinx? Oh, here. Consecrated. Ah, I spelled that wrong. Amazing. Oh, well, it still showed up anyway. Consecrated Sphinx. Whenever the opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. So, you know what? Yeah, let Feldegriff go back to your hand. Let your opponent draw 2 cards. Now what happens? You draw 2. So, Group Hug is built around giving your opponents benefits while you are doubling up on the benefits that they are not able to really do anything about that. Like it's all plus side to a certain point. Mid range again, Spell Slinger. I did show this earlier. Primarily, you are playing creatures that benefit from you casting spells. Um, so we kind of covered this earlier when we are talking about aggro. So there are mid-range versions of this because usually you are building up the spells that you need in order for you to like one shot or like really burst through your opponent. Reanimator, we also talked about earlier. You're pretty much putting creatures into your graveyard so that you can bring them back in cheaper. This is also considered like a mid range strategy because typically you're going to try playing and then bringing your creatures back mid game so that you get additional benefit from them, which also kind of leads to the last one, which is clone. That in the middle of the game, once you have identified what are like the biggest threats or problem on the table, make copies of them so you also have the threats. Usually, these are very, very tricky builds because it's reliant on having targets. You need to have stuff that you can copy. But at the same time, like the unpredictability of this deck is just something that is so hard for you to prepare for. So, those are some examples of mid range decks that come to mind. And I put in a special slide here to close out also this episode for the ones that I wasn't able to categorize. So, others, there are theme decks. Okay, there's tribal, like, oh, I want cat tribal. Yeah, sure. But then there are other ones that are, let's say, Magic has their clans or their guild. There's the guilds of Ravnica. So like, oh, I'm gonna make an Izzet guild theme deck. Okay. Oh, I'm going to make, let's say, an artifacts matter deck. So that is the theme overall. That there are combo versions to that. There are control. There are combo versions. They don't really fall anywhere because it's not about the deck build anymore. It's just about like this theme over arching theme over everything. That's what takes priority in the build. So it doesn't really fit in the archetypes we discussed because something else is driving the deck building here. Next is Vorthos. This is just all about flavor. Okay, this is like, oh, I want to make a deck themed about the members of the Weatherlight. And okay, you can do that, but it's like a five-color deck that may not really have any main purpose. I want to make a Gatewatch deck and have all of the planeswalkers from the Gatewatch in there. Okay, but what does the deck do? Does it is it aggro? Is it control? Like sometimes there isn't any answer, that they literally just want to build something for the sake of telling a story. um to each their own. I'm not a fan of these because I find them like just spinning wheels going nowhere, and it's there's a time for the story and there's a time for the gameplay. For me, my opinion, that I love the story of Magic the Gathering, but I'm not gonna stop a game to tell people that, oh, these two cards shouldn't be in a deck because that one's a hero and that one's a villain. Build it whatever way you want, but you know there is a time and place for that. Then we have meme decks. Oh my god, meme decks. These ones are literally just you spinning plates around for the sake of a joke. That I have played against decks that have like up their purpose is just to be second place. Like this, it's a joke. You cannot take it seriously, but at the same time, everyone is allowed to build any way that they want. You know, to each their own. Now, if they're happy that they're not winning, or like that they don't have answers, or that they get frustrated with the rest of the, but they still get to tell their jokes, their memes still happen. That, oh, every card that they chose is like have has like a celebrity look-alike, or that I chose a bunch of planeswalkers that are supposed to be like characters from a TV show. Okay, go for it. Like, um, build a Walking Dead deck that literally is just about zombies and the characters, but don't really do anything. Okay, that's technically like a theme deck as well. But I do have a friend that has a meme deck built on Tommy Wiseau's The Room. It's a weird deck, but it actually functions. It's just that it just has all of these jokes in it that it's a hit or miss depending, but it's their build. That's how they want to play. fine. I don't know if it fits into aggro control or into combo, honestly. So that's why it's out, or even mid range. It's out there. I put it as others. The final one, and this one is just the screaming headache that I get from time to time when I join casual commander pods, is the chaos deck. I used to play a green red chaos deck in one on one. The idea was to randomize everything that was happening just so that we would just like both die simultaneously. Like this was such a pure hate deck that even I had to just stop and like, am I even really playing Magic? So chaos decks are specifically meant just to shake everything up, randomize everything. They're primarily red decks because red loves randomization. The scramble verse here. So let's go ahead and just give you an idea of what to expect. I hope I spelled that right. Scramble verse. For each non-land permanent, choose a player at random. Then that each player gains control of each permanent of which that was chosen. Basically, every permanent is randomly reassigned to someone. If you're playing a four-player game and you are maybe an hour in or 30 minutes in, think about the amount of permanents that you are going to have to start randomly exchanging control. The whole game will stop just to resolve this. And the game isn't over yet. You then have to continue playing with the new board state that you have. It's rough, and it is something Magic built. It exists. You can play it. I don't recommend that you do, but there are some people who just do it for the lulz, and okay, that's really their thing. So to each their own again. And that pretty much covers what I wanted to talk about today. So just to take a step back again to what we talked about. Today we discussed Magic the Gathering deck archetypes. I hope that this information was useful for you. We kind of shot a little over the time that I planned for today, but I really wanted, or I had a lot that I wanted to talk about, and I would super appreciate your feedback. If there are any other fundamentals that or from Magic the Gathering that you want to learn about, please let me know. I'd be happy to, add that into my list of upcoming topics. So until then, happy Sunday, everyone. Keep gaming.